The Monkey is the latest Osgood Perkins movie. It releases in theaters this weekend. Here's my review. So I was very much looking forward to this movie. It was on my most anticipated list of 2025 just because I absolutely loved the marketing for the movie. I loved Longlegs, which was Osgood Perkins' movie last year. So instantly, every movie that he does, it is on my radar. I was very much looking forward to this movie. It was really high up on the list too. It was number 4 on my most anticipated list. But before I tell you if I was disappointed or if I liked it, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, hit the bell, and comment down below what are your personal opinions on The Monkey. And with all that said, let's go ahead and dive right in to why The Monkey really disappointed me. And yes, that's true. This movie was a massive disappointment. Now, before I talk about why I didn't like the movie, I'm going to say the things I did like about the movie. The first thing are the kills. What I was most excited for going into this movie was the kills and the humor. We'll talk about the humor here in a minute. But the kills really worked for me. Every time that the movie was starting to lose me, I was starting to get bored by the movie. There's always this ludicrous kill, a body exploding, someone getting brutally murdered in a absolutely insane and crazy way. It really worked for me, and the kills were really cool. Not to spoil any, but I did really find a few certain kills to be better than others. There was one or two that I don't think worked, but for the majority of it, every time the movie started to lose me, the kills brought me back in. Now, we'll talk more about the humor in the next section. Another thing I want to talk about is the cast. I really did like this cast, specifically Theo James as the two brothers. He plays dual roles here. I think he's good. He's given this wacky, ludicrous performance. It's not anything real special, but it is wacky, it is crazy, and it is a fun performance by Theo James. But another standout for me was Tatiana Maslany, who I've only seen in She-Hulk. This was the first movie I've ever seen her in. I've seen her in the She-Hulk Marvel show, but she, I thought, was a big standout here. And she's not in the movie that long, but when she is in the movie, I did think that she was a standout. Now let's talk about the humor, which unfortunately is a little bit mixed for me, where when the movie's funny, it's really funny. There are about 3 or 4 really good jokes that made me just absolutely die laughing. Like big belly laughs too, like the whole theater could just hear me cracking up. There's some sequences like that, where you mix the kills and the comedic timing perfectly at some sequences, but more specifically as the movie goes on, a lot of the humor started to feel forced. It felt like someone was writing their first time script and tried to incorporate humor into it. That's genuinely what it felt like. It is so unbelievably forced. Like, there's a serious moment and someone will say, oh, they say a joke, and then it just feels so forced and takes you right out of the moment. But when the movie's funny, it is very funny. There are some sequences here that made me die laughing. One at the very beginning and one at the very end, specifically, were my 2 favorite sequences in the movie. And when the humor works, it works. But then when we get the forced humor, it can really distract you from the movie. So the humor is not necessarily the best part of the movie. I do think it's fine, but there are some very forced jokes in here. And now it's time to talk about why I didn't like the movie, where there is aspects I did really like about the movie, but I'm going to go negative on this movie. Unfortunately, this is another huge disappointment for me. And it's the story and the script here, because from the very beginning, it's very clear that for the longest time, there's not really an essential story. It's just the monkey and people get murdered. No real story here. And then we get the story in the final 30 minutes of the movie. I'm not sold by the direction they went. They go in a really weird direction. And not to spoil, but this direction is weird. We get a little bit in pieces of a story as soon as we blast from the kids to the future. And then that story works, but then all of a sudden you start getting twists and turns and reveals of what's actually going on, and they just don't make sense whatsoever. The last 30 minutes of this movie really, really lost me. I was really lost in the final 30 minutes of this movie, just because some of the ideas that they had, some of the plot points that they had, just don't make sense. There are several times in the film where there's a sequence or two, back to back, don't make any sense. It feels like we're missing sequences from earlier in the film to have those sequences make sense. And then as the movie goes on, there's not really anything that makes them make sense. Like, it's just some random imagery and something like, oh, I don't know what just happened there, but I am completely uninvested from the movie. And then, like I said, the final twist here was just so far ludicrous and crazy that it didn't work for me. The tones really are inconsistent, and the tones really don't match for me. Where times it tries to be a horror comedy, where that really works, but then you have the forced jokes in there, and then like the overall story just kind of feels like a parody. Like, not to spoil it, and it's very hard to talk about without spoiling, but some of the areas and some of the directions that they go for in this movie just completely feel like a parody and feel like you're stretching the truth. You have to suspend your disbelief in order to believe this movie. And I don't normally criticize suspending your disbelief, because Trapped was a movie that came out last year. I absolutely loved Trapped. And that movie, you had to suspend your disbelief a lot. And that didn't bother me at all with that movie. But this movie, it definitely bothered me. It's one of the first movies I've ever seen that did bother me with the amount of disbelief you had to suspend. And with that, with the story that doesn't make sense, the forced humor at certain points in the movie, I felt this one to be very jarring. When it's on, the movie can be good. Specifically, in like the final 10 minutes, I think it's really good in that. And I left with a good taste in my mouth. But the majority of the movie was just like, there's sequences that worked, and then there's sequences that just completely get me uninvested. But there's nothing fully in the movie that hits that point. The point to where you want to say, that was fantastic. There's nothing in the movie that is fantastic. There's just some really good things in here. The closest thing to fantastic are the kills and the makeup, which I thought really did work. But the story aspect really hurts this movie for me, and unfortunately I'm going to have to go negative on The Monkey. Before I give you my final score, please make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, hit the bell, and comment down below if you've seen The Monkey. What are your opinions of it? And if you haven't seen it, are you anticipating it? Are you going to watch The Monkey or not? And with that said, The Monkey for me really worked with the kills. I thought the kills were really fun. The cast is good. And some humor really works. But overall, like, a lot of the humor feels forced and the story just doesn't make sense, even especially as more of the movie goes along. The Monkey, I'm going to have to give a C. It is a very disappointing movie for me. Stay tuned for several more videos coming up very soon. And with that said, subscribe.